Hi, I'm Mitch Horowitz, the editor-in-chief of Tarcher Penguin, and today we're talking with one of Tarcher Penguin's new authors, Adam Elenbaas, the author of Fishers of Men, the Gospel of an Ayahuasca Vision Quest. Adam, what motivated you to write this book and to write it as a work of nonfiction?
I knew I wanted to write about this colorful past that I had in Minnesota and in the Midwest and in the church. And I mean, I had just so many stories from growing up in the church that were fantastic and interesting. And I knew I wanted to tell them. And as these ayahuasca experiences started happening, what motivated me to tell the story was, like, I guess the idea that I was on a healing journey, and it wasn't just about, like, my past is this thing that's stagnant or static and in some ways behind me, but that as I was doing the healing work with ayahuasca, I realized the way in which the past was living in me, in the present, and that by telling my story in some ways, I would be straightening. I mean, it's an interesting thing that humans do. We have a way of looking at our past in a way that we can deceive ourselves about the drama of it, and we can exaggerate certain details or overemphasize things, and oftentimes writing about it for people or talking about it or whatever, there's a therapy to telling your story. And I think so the motivation for my book was, like, therapeutic, it was artistic, you know, all these different things, and it kind of just it came together into this narrative, which is, again, it's a coming of age story.
So one of the interesting aspects of your book is that you've shared some of these experiences with your father, and at least one reviewer pointed out that as much as anything else, the book is a father-son memoir. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, sure. Well, as I started to write the book through ceremonial experiences, and really, when I first went, I was in my master's degree in writing my thesis, and I was a creative writing grad student, and I wanted to write about the experience, but I had already read a number of books out there on psychedelics, on psychedelic medicine, on sort of more anthropological ways of looking at ayahuasca or at anything else, peyote or whatever. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to write a coming-of-age story. And so I wrote my book about my relationship with my father, who was a Methodist preacher growing up in the church in these, interesting and very, colorful small Minnesota towns that I grew up in. And looking at my relationship to Christianity, and the relationship I had with my father, the preacher, who really had, like, a fall from grace throughout his career, where my family started falling apart, and there was a marital affair, and there was a lot of really intense difficulty, and my rebellion took place as I saw my father sort of falling away from God and the church and fidelity and all. My rebellion, as opposed to most kids, I think, who just go out and get drunk or something, my initial rebellion was to become, like, an ultra Pentecostal fundamentalist, like, to really kind of go in my dad's face. He was more liberal and progressive. And so then, but that as that deteriorated, that led me into a life of drugs and promiscuous sex and soul searching and trying to figure out how to be on my own, and really there was this disconnect between me and my dad the whole time, and I loved him so deeply. So the book, I think, really explores my relationship with my father, with the church, with my family, as much as it does the ayahuasca experience, because at the core of my ayahuasca visions were encounters with Jesus. Those encounters helped me to revisit my Christian past, rework my relationship with my father, and to really heal and revision my Christian faith into something new and into something much more universal. And so that storyline of the book, to me, I mean, I was so happy to hear You know, the reviewer last week that said that the book was as much about family and fathers and sons as it was about the ayahuasca. That made me really happy, because my intention wasn't to write a book that was primarily about ayahuasca, but more so the coming of age mythos. What does it mean to have a coming of age experience these days? We still need these rites of passage. They're still really important. We need family. We need to learn how to forgive and work with the difficulties of our families, because they're falling apart all over. And how can we do that, and how can I look at that experience, which I feel is really universal to like all of my friends and people who are in their 20s, and like everyone that I know is in their 20s like has some issue with their family. And so I wanted to look at that experience, that life archetype, through the lens of these beautiful ceremonies. And so I think that the way that they fit together is really beautiful, because first and foremost, before I ever did ayahuasca, I was a storyteller and a writer. So being able to have both of those things side by side, and the book really is a story, which is why, you know, so it's great.
Yeah, one of the things that most touched me about the book is that it takes us to all these different settings and into all these different lives and relationships, both those that you experienced in South America when you were taking ayahuasca, into the small towns that you grew up in Minnesota, where your family moved around a bit, into some very harrowing episodes worthy of Jim Carroll in New York City and Chicago. And you know, one of the things that touches me is how surprising some of these settings are. Like when you were going through this period of fundamentalist evangelism, it's still not quite what people think. There was a lot of searching going on, a lot of debating going on. There was a lot of friction happening within these colleges and institutions that you were attending. So I always found these relationships surprising.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the fun things about writing the book was to be like, you know, in a sense, the book is like you're looking at sort of like Bible Belt fundamentalism, but you're looking at that through the lens of like a summer Bible camp, where I'm dealing with like a really kind of eccentric older lady who's trying to teach me how to speak in tongues, and it's absurd and it's hilarious, but then the inner workings of me kind of looking at that in myself and wondering what it all means, and comparing it to the church I grew up in that doesn't speak in tongues, and the comedy of it. And like there's moments like that in the book that are, I think, really what was so fun about writing it was realizing like that you can pick stories from different parts of your life to illustrate these themes in these different settings. And that was, I think, probably the peak of my artistry in this book, was being able to pick, like, for example, you know, when I'm in college and I'm like, you know, there's a point in college where I break my arm playing football with a bunch of guys, and the mentality of the fundamentalism is really enmeshed in this like alpha male Republican football playing, this whole thing. And you know, then my father happens to come from Michigan to help me heal while I'm in my hospital bed recovering from this really bad break. And there's this moment of that I connect with him in a way that's so much deeper than what I'm trying to connect with at college with these like ultra wealthy conservative guys. And so there's these moments like that where, and those are the stages that I set to explore, well, what does my faith mean to me? And I think that, like those moments are, and funny enough, but a lot of those moments to me were moments that came in the healing visions and ceremonies. So I went back to moments, and you find out some of the most important moments in your life are in these little cracks that you kind of forget about. And so I tried to, I mean, the ayahuasca definitely helped me to like focus in on some of those moments throughout the book.